Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar of bad news. I know that nobody here is here, being excited. We all know if we're here, we know that Neopest is something new for us, and it's something big. Especially to our strawberry production, not just in Kentucky, but throughout the eastern part of the US and into Canada. So I am the plant pathologist here at UK. I work with diseases and disease management of fruits, vegetables, and other specialty crops. So I've been working with strawberries for the entirety of my career here at UK. But today we're going to focus specifically on Neopest. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And as Kim mentioned, we're going to put questions in the chat because we're recording this, and then we'll come back to them. But feel free to keep typing in the chat as we go. All right. So Neopestalotiopsis, that's the name of the disease, and that's the name of the pathogen that we're dealing with here. Most people call it Neopest simply because it's a very long Latin word. So feel free to call it Neopest. It's okay. We spell it that way because it's hard to spell. We say it that way because it's hard to say. But Neopestalotiopsis, in case you're wondering or want to challenge yourself. So Neopest or Neopestalotiopsis appeared first in Florida during the 2017-18 winter growing season. It spread really rapidly there in that region, especially as the weather was warm and rainy, and it just continued to spread. Plant losses were very high, fruit losses were very high, and what those researchers there in that area in the southeastern part of the U.S. quickly realized that none of the cultivars they were using were resistant. This disease proved very difficult to manage and even difficult to suppress. And that, again, that's why we're here today, because this is a very aggressive disease. So I'm going to talk about the symptoms. So this disease has symptoms on leaves, fruit, and crowns, roots, and they look a lot like a lot of the other diseases that we know well. So that makes it even more difficult because by the time we identify it, sometimes it's a little bit too late. So let's start with leaf symptoms. Leaf symptoms begin on the older leaves, just like most of our leaf diseases do. Spots start out circular, then they become more irregular or blocky or blotchy. And then those spots or those lesions will start to coalesce. That means they start to join each other and become more of a large necrotic region. The spots will start out as dark, and then they become light in the center and kind of that dark margin. And so they're kind of multicolored. Again, that center it usually turns more bleached or more light tan. The spots are scattered across leaves. So depending on what kind of leaf diseases we have, usually there's some pattern. Not this one. The lesions can be just scattered all over the leaf. For any of those spots or lesions on the edges of the leaves, they usually take on a V shape in the margin. So if you look at the leaflet all the way to the left hand of your screen, you'll see kind of that V shape coming in, and you'll notice that in some of the images that I'm going to be showing as we go. And I talked about those centers of spots that become tan. So if you look at the upper leaflet in the screen, you'll see the center is kind of that whitish or that bleached tannish looking. That's where we're going to see something we call acervuli. Acervuli are these fruiting bodies or the cluster of spore masses in that center. And I'm going to have some close-ups of those as we go. So that's kind of the telltale sign of Neopestalotiopsis. The leaf symptoms of Neopest disease look a lot like Phomopsis leaf spot, common leaf spot, strawberry leaf scorch, strawberry leaf blight, strawberry leaf blotch, sorry. So it looks a lot like a lot of these other diseases, especially very early on, especially until those acervuli start to develop. So at first, again, it can be challenging. The fruit rots also take on a symptom that seems familiar. Fruit symptoms will begin as light tan. They'll start as round and they become really kind of irregular. The lesions will be sunken. That's the word, by the way, for anthracnose. So this looks just like anthracnose fruit rot. So that's that as that fruit tissue decays, it will become sunken, it collapses. And eventually this disease or the pathogen will take over the entire fruit. So the entire fruit becomes diseased. Those acervuli will develop in the centers of those lesions as well. And again, those are those black spore masses. So they look kind of like black pepper flakes, except they're shiny. They look almost wet. And like I said a second ago, this looks like anthracnose fruit rot. Very similar with the exception of these acervuli that develop in the middle of that lesion. And then finally, we have the crown rot symptoms. When crowns become infected by any disease, we'll have wilting as a result of the girdling. Okay, so reddening of the older leaves, then the new leaves becoming stunted. If you look down on that crown, it will become orangish brown, so it'll become necrotic or it'll start to decay. And then that decay can move. So the decay starts usually in the leaves. It works its way to the crown and it keeps going. It works its way to the roots. So it's a little bit of a lot of a progression from upper canopy to lower canopy of the plant. Infected roots will become dark brown to black. So if you dig the plant up, you'll see the rot or the decay of the roots. And with all of this, of course, plants will die. So the necrosis on that crown and then the root disease, there's just no way for that plant to get the water and nutrients it needs to its leaves and fruit. The crown rot and root rot symptoms usually come later in the season, so usually during fruiting. Not exclusively, but it's most common during fruiting. And again, this phase of Neopest disease looks like yet another one of the diseases that we're familiar with, anthracnose crown rot. So if you cut that crown open, you'll see you've got that necrosis inside. You'll see that decay. So it looks like anthracnose crown rot. So what is Neopestalotiopsis? What is it and where did it come from? So Neopestalotiopsis is the genus of this pathogen. The species, however, is unknown. So closely related is a pathogen called Pestalotia. And there are several diseases caused by Pestalotia. They are generally very mild diseases. We call them opportunistic. So when a plant is really stressed, Pestalotia will infect. They are often secondary pathogens. So Neopestalotiopsis is closely related to Pestalotia, except surprise, it's not opportunistic, and it's not secondary, and it's not mild. It's very aggressive. Neopestalotiopsis, species unknown. So there are scientists working on that. Okay, so we're not just going to say it's unknown. As of today, we do not have a name for this one, so it's going to get a new name. That's what's happening. So when we say unknown, it means it's not something we have in the literature. It's not something we've identified before, and there's a process that scientists go through to name a species. So that's what's happening. So when I say unknown, so Neopestalotiopsis, the causal pathogen of the disease we're talking about tonight, infects strawberries almost exclusively. So my colleagues or my counterparts in Florida have identified some weeds that can become infected, although asymptomatic. So they're not showing disease symptoms. That information should be coming really soon. So as soon as that information comes out, we will share it with you. Generally, Neopestalotiopsis, as we said, started in Florida. It has spread, but it doesn't just spontaneously appear on your farm. It has to be introduced onto your farm. So you have to bring it in. It's not going to blow in with the wind. Usually and almost exclusively, Neopest is introduced by plugs, infected propagation material. Once it's there, it spreads short distances by water or rain, so splash, by workers, so that's dirty gloves, dirty coveralls or jeans or tools, equipment, any way that we can carry debris or soil or that those spores can hitchhike around the farm. So long distances by introducing it on almost exclusively by plugs, short distances, splash, and just movement of soil, debris, and spores. Okay, so what are the preferences? What are the environmental conditions that Neopestalotiopsis prefers? Almost exclusively, it's prolonged wetness, 48 hours or more. So that can be a rainy season, and we all know we're about to get into the rainy season here in Kentucky. Consecutive rain events, wet spring, warm spring days, it's ideally what this pathogen likes. However, when we talk about prolonged wetness, we're in an artificial agronomic system, right? So we have irrigation going on. If you're producing plugs, you have overhead mist systems. So we are giving it the water it needs. So it's not like it's in nature and it's exposed to droughts and natural environmental conditions. We have very artificial conditions, so we're giving it the water it needs. Favored temperatures are 60 to 78 degrees. So it doesn't like it cold and it doesn't like it hot. So within 60 to 78 degrees, we have pretty rapid sporulation. That's the release of spores and infection. So that means when a spore lands on a healthy leaf, for example, or fruit, it can infect. So that's ideal. However, we can have sporulation and infection as low as 50 degrees, as high as 86 degrees, although that's not as rapid. So we have a slower life cycle and the outer edges of that range, but 60 to 78 is ideal. That's when this pathogen is most aggressive. All right, here's the kicker, right? This pathogen overwinters, or in our case, in a strawberry case, it oversummers. So it survives without a host. That's the short version of what overwintering is. So when I use the word overwinter, just think of it as survival outside of a host. Neopestalotiopsis overwinters in debris, and the spores that are released can overwinter in the soil. Cold temperatures help it survive. So cold temperatures are not going to destroy this pathogen. It's only going to help it survive. And the colder it is, we believe, we have some more research to do for colder climates, but we believe if this mimics closely related fungi or fungi in general, the colder the temperature, the more likely it is to survive. Right now, we know that survival is very easily 6 months or so on the surface of the soil. That's when it's dry and hot and adverse conditions on the surface of the field. All right. So if it's buried 18 months or more, and our colleagues in Florida have confirmed it, 18 months in extreme Florida heat, buried just below the surface. What we know about fumigation, so we don't fumigate much. There are only a few of our growers here in Kentucky that fumigate, but we know that fumigation is not 100% effective. It does a good job, don't get me wrong, but typically when we fumigate the rows and not in between the rows. So we really haven't accomplished anything by fumigating only the rows, because that inoculum or those spores and that debris is in the middle and it does splash or move its way back into the rows. But even if we fumigated everything, fumigation, of course, is very expensive and it's not always feasible for a small grower. Even if we fumigate our entire field, we're not going to completely destroy Neopest. All right, so how do we manage it, right? That's why we're all here. How do we manage Neopest? We're going to follow the same pathology rules that we follow for every pathogen, every disease that we encounter. We're going to ideally exclude it, not let it in. And if it does come in, we're going to try to eradicate it. Now, eradicate it means absolute. That's not going to happen, but we're going to attempt to manage it. We're going to attempt to reduce it and slow it down. So those are the two approaches that we're going to use, and I'm going to talk about it from that standpoint. All right, so first, exclusion. Keeping it out. We're not bringing it in. If you have a farm that does not have Neopest, don't bring it in. If you have an area of your farm that it hasn't made it there yet, so if it's isolated to one area or another, you're going to keep it from spreading within your farm. So in short, Never introduce new pathogens to your farm, especially if you know, right? It's bad enough that a lot of times we introduce things that we don't know. But if you know, never introduce anything new to your farm. Inspect your plugs really good in the fall. Make sure you're not bringing it in. If you ever doubt any disease at all, right? Whether it's a root rot, whether it's a leaf spot, whether it's a crown rot, don't bring it in. When you move between fields, you're using caution. So be very careful if you're working within your farm. Okay. And I'll talk about this in a little bit, but you're always going to work on the clean parts of your farm, and you're going to work on the infested or the affected parts of your field last in the day. And then that way you can wash your equipment, change your coveralls, wash your boots, and go home. Every farm, every mixed farm should be blocked or zoned. So we do that when we rotate, right? So our standard practice is to rotate on a 3-year basis. So we're always going to have blocks or zones. So when you block or zone, you know where disease has been, where we have a history of disease, and where you don't. So you're going to make your moves based on that and your rotations based on that. And I will say this many times, I'll probably go to my grave saying this: fungicides do not cure disease. Okay, fungicides can suppress, and fungicides are at their best by protecting. Once a plant is infected, fungicides do not cure. In the past, 10 or 15 years ago, when we first started getting a lot of these really good systemic products on the market, companies started using words like curative action. There's no curative action, okay? We still have remnants of that terminology. There is no curative action. Fungicides will not cure this disease or any disease. Once infection occurs, infection is there. Fungicides can suppress, they can slow the activity down, they can almost bring that pathogen into a dormant state for 2 or 3 weeks. Then that pathogen becomes active again. And then a protectant is going to protect that leaf. So if that spore does land, it's not able to penetrate. And that's ideally where we want to be with our fungicides. Okay, so what if you have Neopest on your farm? Can you eradicate it? That's the word we use. We're not going to eradicate it, right? Nothing is ever absolute. But we can do a really good job at reducing it to very low levels, that it's manageable. The first thing we do is remove and destroy infected plants. And we do that before they can sporulate more or spread more spores or drop more infected debris on the ground. After the season, deep tilling, so burying that debris, let it decompose faster. And then again, before the growing season, again, till again. So we're burying deep, and that helps accelerate decomposition. We always want to rotate with non-host for 3 or more years. So what we know about Neopest is 18 months to 3 years overwintering. There are cases that Neopest has been overwintering for 5+ years, okay? So it is known to overwinter for a longer period of time, but in general, we're aiming for that 2 to 3 year mark. If you have a history of Neopest on your farm, I would say at least 3 year rotation. And again, that's what we should be doing anyway for lots of other diseases, not just Neopest. We're going to use fungicides as preventatives. If you've already got Neopest in your field, you're going to use fungicides as a suppressant, expecting that they are not going to be a cure. They're not going to save your entire crop. Okay, so there's a cost benefit analysis to be done there, depending on how severe disease is, and of course what the weather conditions are. Remember, I talked about that constant leaf wetness. And then again, I'm saying it again and again, that fungicides won't cure. So you're using a lot of tactics to try to reduce the amount of inoculum, and then you have to decide whether you can save a current crop, or do you have to cut your losses and then next year try again and try some of these preventative tactics? All right, fungicides. Let's talk fungicides. So with our fungicides that we know, so Again, Florida has been working on this for a very long time. A lot of universities across the southeastern US have done a lot of trials. So this is the data. Thyram SC, which is an M-class fungicide, so it's effective. So these are effective fungicides. Sorry, let me backtrack. So are effective fungicides that are effective against Neopest and are labeled for strawberries are listed here. This is it. This is the short list. So Thyram SC, which is an M class, it allows, so those of us east of the Mississippi River, 12 applications allowed per cropping season, not per year. You can't say you can use 12 in the fall and 12 in the spring. It's 12 per season, per crop season. We know that the EPA is about to start limiting Thyram's use. From what I have read, I expect that the limitations on Thyram will be more in the line of seed treatments, increased PPE, and some environmental protections. I don't think it's going to be pulled from strawberry. So that's the only good news that I have today. Another effective fungicide is Switch. Switch is a premix, Frax 12 and 9. This label allows us 5 applications per growing season. And Switch can also be used as a pre-plant dip. So a lot of you are probably already using Switch as a pre-plant dip. The next 3 fungicides are Frac 3s. I've put them together. So you're not rotating Frac 3 within a 3. So you're going to use one or another and not all 3 typically. Your Frac 3s allow 4 applications per season for the name brand, and there are some propiconazole generics that allow less. Okay, so those are your limitations. That's where we stand. And so your spray schedule, how do you use these fungicides? You're going to begin soon after transplant, and you're going to apply on 10 to 14 day intervals. Specifically, you're going to read the label. Okay, I'm generalizing here. And as you get closer to harvest, as spring comes around, you're going to look at your PHI, your pre-harvest interval. Thyram has a 1-day PHI, and Rhyme, Switch, Tilt, and Inspire have 0-day PHI. So you can spray the day of harvest. All right, some notes. Anybody who's gone onto the internet and has searched efficacy trials for Neopest see 2 common fungicides that appear to be effective and are listed in trials. That's Omega 500 and Bravo Weather Stick. Neither of these is labeled for strawberries. They were used in trials. They were shown to be effective, but they are not labeled for strawberry. So we, those of us on this call, cannot use them. Omega 500 has a registration for strawberry in the process. It will be maybe this year, probably more like next year. It will be labeled for nursery production only. So, okay, only for plug producers. It will not be labeled for field production. Bravo Weather Stick is a chlorothalonil. It is not registered for use in strawberry, and I do not think anyone is pursuing that registration. If you look up chlorothalonil in general, Echo 720 is labeled for strawberry in California only. So California can use it for non-bearing strawberry, so for nursery production, but Echo is not labeled in Kentucky or anywhere else besides California. So that's our chlorothalonils. So this does not help us in the field production aspect. If you are a plug producer, you may be seeing Omega coming onto the market this year or next. All right. Organic producers, I think I do have some organic producers on the call. Let's take a look at the research data. There are a lot of products that were tested that are not effective against Neopest, but Serenade Opti, which is a Bacillus subtilis, and Actigard. By the way, Actigard is not OMRI approved, but a lot of organic leaning growers will use Actigard. Okay, so not OMRI approved, but these seem to be the best of the organic or soft products that are effective against Neopest. They don't have the same efficacy as those synthetic products that I've already talked about, but these are the best ones in those trials. Now, based on that, these are my opinions. We have not tried these. And actually, I was talking to Dr. Wright about testing some organic or softer products this year. I would like to look at other bacillus products. C. Stargus double nickel. So they're all bacillus, not always the same bacillus species, and definitely not the same bacillus strains, but I would like to look at these. SAR, so those with systemic acquired resistance, which is like an immune booster. Regalia, EcoSwing, and Lifeguard have shown efficacy in similar pathogens. I don't know if they're going to work against Neopest, but I would like to take a look at those. So if you're an organic grower and you have these in your rotation, I think these have potential. If you're organic, you're going to start spraying soon after you transplant, and you're at about a 7 to 10 day interval, especially if it's wet. And by the way, once you've covered your plants with a row cover, trust me, it's very humid in there. All right, so let's look at some other fungicides. There are a lot of trials published right now for efficacy against Neopest. There are a lot more that are not effective than those that are effective. So Kenja, Metal, Procure, and Topsin, no efficacy. The second part of my list here, those are organic leaning products or OMRI certified products, and those do not have efficacy either. So a lot of the things that we use very often, there's Quava, there's a copper, right? Oso, Silmatrix, Oxidate. So things that a lot of our organic growers use are not effective against Neopest, and these are specifically for non-rotational studies. I would like to see us rotate some of these, maybe with some of those bacillus products I mentioned on the previous slide. So maybe there's a way we could get some of these to work, but right now we do not have any indication that these from this page are effective against Neopest. All right, so let's look at fungicide schedules. These are conventional. If you have a high-risk situation, so let me start by saying that if you have a high-risk situation, you have to do a cost-benefit analysis, okay? If a crop is too far gone, nothing will work. So just know that. So when I say high risk, I mean that you had disease in the fall before you covered. Also, too, this schedule, for those of you on that are not from Kentucky, you may have a different schedule. So the schedule here is based on the seasons here in Kentucky. So when we start spraying and when we stop spraying before we cover, and in the spring, when we uncover and start spraying again until the time we harvest. Okay, that's where I got these numbers. If you live in a warmer climate or you're going to be uncovered longer, this may change. So talk to your extension service. But here in Kentucky, this is the schedule that we are recommending. In the fall, we're going to use, in a high risk, we're going to use Thiram in every one of our tank mixes. Remember, we can spray up to 12 times with Thiram in a year. I would put it in every tank. As those plants start to grow and as we start to see some moisture, I would start adding in Switch, either Rhyme or Inspire, and rotate those out. All right. If you have a moderate risk, let's say maybe an adjacent field had Neopest, or maybe a couple of plants had Neopest, and so your risk is more moderate, you're not going to do that tank mix. You're pretty much going to rotate Thiram with Switch with Rhyme or Inspire, right? So you can choose any of those frac 3s. So you're not using as much fungicide. This is much more economical, of course, but again, you have to weigh that risk and the profit margin on your farm. By the way, we have this in a fact sheet. So if you're missing this, we are going to record this. We are going to upload it, but we also have it in a fact sheet, and we will put that link in the chat for everyone. So don't worry if you're missing this right now in the moment. All right. So in summary, to manage Neopest, you're going to start clean and not bring it in the first place. You're going to rotate your crops at least 2 years while deep tilling in between crops. I'd like to see you rotate on a 3 to 4 year basis, but at least 2. You're going to avoid moving soil around your farm, avoid moving debris because you don't want to spread it across your farm. And you're going to use fungicides as preventatives, okay? Not curatives, but preventatives. Suppressants when we're desperate. All right, so If you're using fungicides, remember, you probably only have about a 50% efficacy rate when you're using fungicide. So even if you have disease and you're using fungicide, kind of think about it as a 50% efficacy rate. They're expensive and they're not 100% effective. So again, it's about the dollar. And don't think that you can move Neopest around your farm and you can depend on fungicides because they will not cure. All right, so your resources. Start with our Department of Plant Pathology page. This is our extension page with our publications. And I have the URL down at the bottom of this slide, plantpathology.ca, that means College of Agriculture, .uky.edu. And you can find lots of publications here. You can find information on other strawberry diseases. You can find our spray guides. You can find information on other crops. So that's where you'll find that. And if you go to that page, you will find other strawberry pubs. There is that Neopest disease of strawberry publication, the one right in the middle of this slide. And Kim has already put that one in the chat for you. And that spray schedule is in there. And we also have other strawberry disease pubs like this one on anthracnose fruit and crown rot. All right. And finally, other resources. Know your extension service. We have a county office in all 120 counties here in Kentucky. Get to know your county agent. They are your source, not just for Neopest resources, but for all resources, not just disease, but insect management, production, lots of different things. They are also your source for our plant disease diagnostic lab. So if you are a commercial grower, we almost always submit samples to the diagnostic lab. We always recommend that. So we have a record for you so that when you call us in a year or 3 years, we know we have a record. And it also helps confirm so we know what we're dealing with and we can help you manage and make better recommendations for you. And then, of course, social media. We post a lot on social media. I think Kim has put some of those resources in the chat for you. And if you look for the handle KY Plant Disease, you can find us in lots of all of your social media platforms. So we are there. And that is it. We will take questions now. You can unmute yourself. You can raise your hand. However you want to do it. And Kim is going to read some of what's in the chat unless you choose to ask a longer question.
So as Nicole mentioned, I have put into the chat where you can find the recording, a link directly to the fact sheet that Nicole has created for this specific disease, a link to all of our extension publications, and then a link to also help you find your county extension office if you don't know where they are. And with that, feel free if you've got questions, if there's something that you want to know a little bit more about, please feel free to unmute yourself during this time and ask that question out loud. Or if you feel more comfortable, by all means, type that question into the chat and I'm happy to read that aloud so Nicole can answer that. So again, please do feel free to take this opportunity to ask any of those questions or any of those things that you're thinking about or want to know more about. Sean has asked, can it carry over on row cover? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, row covers, lots of different things, right? Remember I talked about any way you can move debris or soil, spores, like they stick to your jeans and they stick to your shoes, they can stick to row cover. So very much the same, they surviving. Remember, they're surviving in the elements on soil surfaces for 6 to 9 months minimum. And so by the time you put that row cover in storage and pull it back out, I would bet that there's a lot of survival on those row covers. That's a tough one, right? Because how do you clean row covers? Oh, Elizabeth, steam treating row covers? I don't know what you do. Do you think they'll hold up to steam? So ideally, yes. Ideally, that should work. Right? Or you could wash them, right, in bleach because we bleach things. That's how we kill pathogens in our lab. So you can bleach it or use some kind of commercial disinfectant, but will that degrade the row covers? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Cole, that would be a good undergraduate project, right?
That's something. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's something we're looking at because, not only are we worried, the just the bonded material will break down, but also the glue seams. And so
Yeah.
we were thinking about, cargo containers, which a lot of people, store their covers in cargo containers. And I'm guessing that they don't get hot enough in the summer on their own.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering if we could rig up some, steam cart like we do soil and just test the viability of the covers, in steam. So again, we're kind of thinking the same way you are. We need to look at it.
So Elizabeth, those cargo sheds get hot. So I would think that that would almost act like a solarization. That's really interesting. Keep us informed. And if someone would wash, I would wonder about quaternary ammonium. I don't know. Yeah, let's talk. As yeah, we need to know that.
Will do.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for sharing all of that. So we have a few other questions that have come in through the chat. One wanting to know, can the UK plant diagnostic lab test and confirm the disease?
Yes. So our plant disease diagnostic lab does test. We will not test soil. Okay. We will test plants. So you have to submit a plant. We will test plants. Remember too that we only are testing the plant that you send. So you may not send the right plant. So if you have very low disease, there's a chance that you miss it. So we usually ask for multiple samples, and that's where your county agent comes in. Your county agent can guide you through, or maybe help you look and decide which ones to submit. But yes, we absolutely test those, and we will give you a confirmed report.
Excellent. Next question, can you talk a little bit about resistant varieties? We have a couple questions from folks wanting to know resistant varieties that would be good for Kentucky, as well as just in general. I think some resistant varieties, are they out there, and which ones are they?
Okay, this is and Dr. Wright it might be talking about some of this as well, but in terms of our cultivars, we do not know of resistance. So resistance means not able to get infected. So there are some cultivars, and what we realize is that they don't get as diseased as fast. So they get infected, and it takes just a little bit longer for disease to develop, and disease spreads a little bit slower. And so just be careful that you, like if you're buying plugs and you're looking across several cultivars for your plugs, that may be misleading, because once we get to the field and we cover with row cover and we put that humidity to it, what's it going to be in the spring? So right now there's no resistance. We were talking earlier, Sean and I were talking earlier, there has been a resistance gene identified, but that's going to be used more in breeding. It's so we're years away from that resistance gene being utilized. But right now there are no cultivars that are resistant. We know some that are highly susceptible. But right now, I mean, early on, anytime you have a new disease, this is how it starts, like the worst of the worst news. And it just takes some time for breeders to catch up and for the research to catch up. So hopefully a year from now, we'll be telling a lot different of a story. But for the 2025 season, we don't have resistance, and we don't have really great management options.
Two of the varieties that are particularly susceptible are Sweet Charlie, which is a very early plasticulture variety. I like the flavor, but our growers don't typically grow much of that in Kentucky because it is so early. There's a lot of row cover management that's required with that one. Albion is also one that's been in the market for a while that appears to be very susceptible. So I would definitely stay away from either of those varieties.
Thanks, Sean. I'm sure that's really good advice for our growers. So watch this space. More information coming soon. Hopefully in a year from now, we can do another webinar that has some better news about some new and exciting things that don't get the disease as badly. So definitely make sure that you have connected with us on social media. Make sure you've connected with our YouTube channel, because we share all of that there. And we definitely will want to make sure that we get that information out as well. Just another way that we do keep in touch with our growers here in Kentucky, if you have not subscribed to the listserv for our strawberry growers, I will put my contact information in the chat. You can email me directly and I will add you to that listserv We send out alerts through there. So if something's getting particularly bad, if there's new information, that is our first line of contact with growers. So do make sure, here in a minute, I'll put that in there, and you can connect with me, and I'll be happy to add you to that as well. Sean has also highlighted the Fruit Facts newsletter. If you have not subscribed to that, you can find information about that as well. And I will make sure, again, you can contact me. I can add you to that listserv, or there's information on the horticultural website. I'll put that in there as well. A couple other questions, Nicole. Sherry's asked a really great question, which is, can other crops get this disease?
Okay. This is strawberry specific. So that's the good news. So if you're going to rotate to a non-host, you can rotate to lots of other crops, not strawberry, but be aware that there are some closely related weed species that may become infected, not show disease, may become infected and serve as a green bridge. So I said earlier that we'll be talking a little bit more about that later. But right now, that's all the information that I have. So weed management is important across the board, always is. And then I see another question, Kim. I'm looking at the chat now. Fall or spring planting, which one has greater severity? Spring is wetter, but we're also irrigating and we're also covering our plastic culture berries. So anytime you've got the temperature and the moisture, you've got the same susceptibility. Here in Kentucky, we kind of go from summer to winter. We don't have much of a fall, and that's a very dry season. So we tend to see a lot fewer diseases in the fall. And in the spring, we can have a really extended spring, and it's always wet. I think it rains every day in the spring. So we tend across the board to see more diseases in the spring. More infections in the spring. So infection can occur, but after infection, we can see disease symptoms for months to come, regardless of the weather. So infections in the spring.
For our plasticulture system, we plant in the fall. There would be spring planting for matted row varieties, but plasticulture is fall planted.
Okay. So Carol, I know Carol has a lot of people at her office, so she's asking a lot of questions. Does bare root, early glow, strawberry get it? So early glow are susceptible, and bare root plants have leaves, so they can become infected. Once a leaf is infected, that infection can go down into the crown, petioles, crown, roots. So there can be infection there. And of course, it's a situation by situation basis, but any part of the plant at any time is susceptible. That is correct.